But we begin tonight with major developments in the Middle East. More hostages released as the Israeli ground assault on Gaza looms. The two hostages, identified as Nurit Cooper and Yocheved Lifshitz, have been released by Hamas. Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades released a video on their Telegram channel showing the two hostages, apparently filmed before and during their release. Here is a still from that video showing Lifshitz, who is 85 years old. Here they are, too, in a video shot by the Egyptian state TV network Al Qaeda News, showing them inside ambulances receiving medical treatment near the Egypt-Gaza border. The military wing of Hamas said it had decided to release the pair for, quote, compelling humanitarian reasons. They have since been handed over to the Israeli Defense Forces and are making their way at this time to a medical center in Israel. Their family members will be waiting for them there. The release of the two hostages comes days after two Americans, Judith and Natalie Ranan, were released by Hamas. The U.S. is advising Israel to delay a ground invasion of Gaza to allow more time for hostage negotiations. But the death toll and widespread devastation continue as Israel steps up its aerial bombardment. As of today, more than 5,000 people have been killed in Gaza. This includes 436 people killed in Israeli airstrikes in the past 24 hours, including 182 children, according to the Ministry of Interior and National Security in Gaza. Some international aid has entered the Gaza Strip. Over the weekend, the first convoys entered the besieged Palestinian enclave through the Rafah border crossing with Egypt. Trucks continue to enter today, but health officials warn that far more is needed to address the crisis. More than 1,400 people have been killed in Israel since the October 7 attack, mainly the civilians killed in the initial Hamas assault. Today, the Israeli government screened for 200 members of the foreign press some 43 minutes of harrowing scenes from the brutal Hamas assault in southern Israel on October 7. The screening reportedly included raw videos from the body cams of the attackers as they went door to door in a kibbutz. Tonight, fears of a broader conflict are rippling inside Gaza and Israel, as well as in the region and throughout the world. It forces the question, what is the end game of an Israeli war on Gaza? Thomas Friedman points out the dangers of an invasion in an unflinching op-ed in the New York Times. Friedman writes, while President Biden expressed deep understanding of Israel's moral and strategic dilemma, he pleaded with Israeli military and political leaders to learn from America's rush to war after September 11th, which took our troops deep into the dead ends and dark alleys of unfamiliar cities and towns in Iraq and Afghanistan. However, from everything I have gleaned from senior U.S. officials, Biden failed to get Israel to hold back and think through all the implications of an invasion of Gaza for Israel and the United States. So let me put this in as stark and clear language as I can, because the hour is late. I believe that if Israel rushes headlong into Gaza now to destroy Hamas and does so without expressing a clear commitment to seek a two-state solution with the Palestinian Authority and end Jewish settlements deep in the West Bank, it will be making a grave mistake that will be devastating for Israeli interests and American interests. Joining me now from Tel Aviv is NBC News correspondent Hala Garani. Hala, thank you for being here. Give us the latest, and I understand you have some reporting on the latest about these released hostages.
Yes, I can report that Qatar and Egypt both led negotiations. They have been, especially Qatar, very diplomatically active with regards to getting these hostages released because, as many of our viewers know, they host the political leaders of Hamas in Doha, the capital of Qatar. Qatar has been able to negotiate because it also has very close relations with the United States, one of the largest military bases, U.S. military bases in the region is located in Qatar. Egypt also took part. These two hostages were released through the Rafah border into Egypt. You mentioned their names, Yocheved Lifshitz, who's 85, and Nurit Cooper, who is 79 years old. They were placed in ambulances. They then switched vehicles and were driven to the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is really not far away at all in Israeli territory, and now are being medically processed before being reunited with their families. the big question is going to be going forward, will we see more of this drip hostage release? Hamas seems to be addressing not just the governments of the region, not just the prime minister of Israel, but also the Israeli public by saying, look, so long as there's no incursion, every couple of days, every 3 days, maybe there will be a hostage release. And the families of these hostages have been putting a lot of pressure on the Israeli leadership, asking them to delay this incursion until more hostages are out. And as far as the U.S. President Biden is concerned, there is also some pressure placed on Prime Minister Netanyahu to try to get more humanitarian aid in, Joy. So we're going to be watching, but it looks so far as though this long anticipated ground incursion is on hold, at least for now.
Hala Garani, thank you very much. Great reporting. Let's bring in Ben Rhodes, MSNBC political analyst and former deputy national security advisor, and Ayman Mohyeldin, host of Ayman on MSNBC, and who covered the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a foreign correspondent. Thank you both. This is the perfect duo to talk about this with. I want to start, Ben, with the Qatar-Egypt part of it. Because obviously it is Qatar that is the one who provides the actual money that funds the West Bank. I'm sorry, not the West Bank, but Gaza. So they're very involved. What do you make of the fact that they were the negotiating partners to get these hostages out? And what does that mean for whether an incursion will be delayed or go forward?
Well, I don't think there's anything particularly surprising about it. Hamas has maintained a political office in Qatar for some time. That may sound strange to some people, but actually it provides a capacity to have these kinds of sensitive conversations. The Taliban, for instance, also had an office in Qatar for a long time. So they would be the natural interlocutor, and there are also ways to pass messages to the Egyptians. I'm sure that Tony Blinken's agenda when he was in Qatar was mainly focused on these hostages. And I'm sure that the Qataris are trying to find formulas. Obviously, you want to release all of them. Could we start with women and children and the elderly? Could we perhaps get the Americans out? There are different formulas to get some of those people out. That said, it doesn't change the underlying dynamic here, which is the question of whether or not there's going to be a full-scale ground invasion of Gaza that would obviously put all of this to the side in some fashion. Sure, I think Qatar is trying to forestall that a bit through what they're doing. But at the end of the day, that decision rests with the Israeli government. And I don't expect that Hamas would tragically release all of these hostages in the kind of time frame that is in advance of Israeli decision-making about that ground invasion.
Amy, can you talk a little bit about Egypt's politics here? Because I did watch a translated version of the Egyptian president speaking about this and essentially saying, bluntly, we're not going to open this crossing to let refugees in from Gaza into Egypt because they're not going to be allowed to go back. Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia said something very similar. Let me play it. I think we do have it. This is Saudi Crown Prince Turki Al Faisal condemning Hamas, condemning what happened, but also condemning the violence in Gaza. Take a listen.
I categorically condemn Hamas's targeting of civilian targets of any age or gender, as it is accused of. Such targeting belies Hamas's claims to an Islamic identity. But equally, I condemn Israel's indiscriminate bombing of Palestinian innocent civilians in Gaza and the attempt to forcibly drive them into Sinai. I condemn Israeli targeted killing and the indiscriminate arrest of Palestinian children, women, and men in the West Bank. Two wrongs don't make a right.
And let me correct myself. Saudi Prince Turki Al Faisal, he's the former ambassador to D.C. Ayman, can you talk about the local Arab countries' politics here, Egypt and Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, and it's also important to add one more in there, and that was the King of Jordan, who spoke actually in plain English over the weekend to a Western audience at this peace summit that the Egyptian government was trying to create a little momentum behind. Look, the consensus among the Arab countries right now as it pertains to the refugees or possible refugees of Palestinians from Gaza into the Sinai Peninsula is a categorical no. And that stems really from the historical trauma of Palestinians being forced off off of their land in 1947, 48, and 1967, in which Palestinians were never allowed to return back to their homes and have lived as second-class citizens in many of these countries, precisely because these Arab countries have felt that if they were to absorb them into their populations, if they were to accept them and give them full rights, that they would be somehow conceding the fundamental right of Palestinians to return. And that is a point that the Egyptian president made very clear, saying if this was purely about humanitarian reasons, then Israel can provide a corridor for Palestinians from Gaza into the West Bank. It could possibly create for them refugee tents inside the Negev desert, inside Israel proper, if you will. And when the operation is over, they can return to Gaza. But the idea of allowing Palestinians to come into the Sinai Peninsula, in addition to providing security concerns for the Egyptians and putting an already fragile economy under a tremendous amount of stress for the president of Egypt, President Sisi, it's just a matter of principle that Egyptian and Arab governments do not want to repeat the mistakes of the past. And that's what you heard as well from Prince Turki al-Faisal, who, as you mentioned, not only was a diplomat to the U.S., but also the head of Saudi intelligence for almost 22 years. And he is very close to the royal palace. So I can assure you that that speech that he gave at the Baker Institute reflected some of the internal thinking of the current crown prince and certainly the current leadership of the Saudi government.